Good morning, all. Welcome this morning. I'm hoping my colleague Dan is going to be appearing in a moment. We've had a few tech problems, but thank you all for joining us today. My name's Tanya Fosdick. I'm Research Director of Agilysis. I'm joined by George Henry, who is... Do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning, everybody. I'm George Henry. I'm Head of Road Policy and Safety at Transport Scotland, Scottish Government.
Perfect. And hopefully very shortly, Dan Campsall, who is Chairman of Agilysis, will also be able... there he is. He's in the room as well.
Yeah, my apologies, everyone. Just that momentary thing where your computer dies just before you're about to go live. So glad to join you all as well. Dan Campsall, Chairman of Agilysis. And I'm going to pick up from there. So great to be with you all and to thank you very much for signing up and joining this Landor Links webinar, where we're going to be looking at safe system cultural maturity, and we're going to be looking at the results of a national survey that we have now been running over the last 3 years. So if we can jump into the main presentation. And what we're going to do is, in the first part of our time together, we're going to focus on the results of that survey and think about what that might mean for organisations working in road safety across the UK, their capacity to deliver against a safe system, based on the culture that underpins all of that. And then we're going to hand over to George, who's going to take us through a little bit about how they are working in Transport Scotland, not only on a safe system framework, but also how they are thinking about the importance of culture to underpin their ambitions for a safe road network. And then we're going to open it up to your questions. And thank you very much to those of you who have already submitted questions in advance. Very many of you have already got some questions in when you registered, but please do feel free to continue to engage with the conversation as we go through. You have the privilege that you don't have to wait to the end. This isn't like the good old days, where you had to put your hand up. You can get your questions into the Q&A box in Zoom, and we'll pick those up when we get into a more discursive piece at the end. But just to provide a little bit of background, if we can go to the next slide on the Safe System Capacity Survey. A couple of years ago, we launched the Safe System Capacity Survey, working in partnership with a range of road safety NGOs and professional bodies, looking to understand the current state of play in the UK in respect of the safe system. What we were interested in is that safe system had started to emerge within UK policy context over from sort of 2015 onwards. It's certainly widely acknowledged as being the best route to enhancing the safety of road networks internationally. But were we in a place where actually we were ready to start delivering against a safe system, particularly as we look to the launch of a new national strategy? So we've now run it. This is the 3rd year, and it helps us to provide a bit of a snapshot of where the sector is at in terms of safe system, who's already working through a safe system lens, and what work still needs to happen to move us nationally to a place where we could have confidence to move forward in that way. And we're enormously appreciative of the support of the different institutions in helping us to reach out to many professionals across the sector in gathering these insights. If we go to the next slide. The previous editions then, basically, we did this sort of baseline survey in 2022 and really focused on highway authorities and public sector organisations within the UK to create something of a baseline. And we created a white paper with the results from that came out early in 2023, and drew out a number of recommendations for the sector. The second edition last year, we widened the focus because there were many people from particularly sort of third sector organisations and academia and private sector organisations who felt that they got significant amounts to contribute to road safety, but they were not included in that first tranche that really looked at sort of public sector capacity. So it enabled us to take a slightly wider view of who's engaging in safe system and the contributions that they can make. And so out of that, there have been a number of things that have really kind of emerged quite clearly as themes. That there's a recognition that the safe system is the lens through which we should be delivering, but that at the moment we lack the leadership and strategic direction to really drive that forward at a national level across Great Britain. That's not necessarily the case within the devolved administrations, as you'll hear later. That requires some clarity around the governance arrangements, the funding, target setting, in order to be able to for people to be able to move forward with confidence. And we also need to develop a more coherent sense of what safe system means for practitioners across the country. And I think that will come out in some of the conversation that we have next. So we go to the next slide. Because Tanya is now going to take you into what some of those results were from last year before we build into results from this year.
Thank you, Dan. So yes, really, we just wanted to have a bit of a recap of what we found out previously, because I think it leads really nicely into why we want to unpick culture, particularly in this year's survey. So actually, one of the most insightful things we've learned from the last couple of years is from open text responses to this particular question about, well, what does safe system mean to you? So we've done some thematic analysis over those 2 years by different stakeholders. So as you can see here, we've got those from the highways and transport authorities, police and partnerships, the charities and others involved, and fire and rescue services. And I think it's been quite interesting to see that they are viewing the safe system in a different lens, or through different lenses. So there's been a little bit of tension at kind of the local authority level because they want to implement the very best interventions. But actually, some of the results showed that they felt quite restricted by the funding and the resources available to them. Partnership and police respondents, very much about thinking about the data and the technology and how we can use those to develop a safe system. But actually, there was also a little bit of an acknowledgement that actually the concepts of safe system hadn't permeated within their organisations as much as it possibly could have done. With the charity sectors, actually with that particular set of response last year, as Dan said, we opened it to the charity sector. We did have quite a few respondents from one particular charity. So it did kind of push the results in one particular way, because it was a driving and motoring charity. And so a lot of it was about car control and road safety behaviour, road user behaviour in particular. But actually, for other organisations, there was quite a low understanding of what the safe system is. So, whilst those who have kind of got more statutory duties are really undertaking and understanding safe system, there is still work to be done with the wider sector on how they can support those delivering at the front end. And then fire and rescue service, very much about collaboration and thinking about their contributions to the different layers of protection. So quite similar because of their participation in partnerships, they had at the levels that we were expecting there. We go on to the next slide, please. We had a variety of different questions about the levers, the ways in which we can deliver a safe system and how much they are involved in participating in these particular levers. So as you can see here, real wide range at the respondent level on how they influence the safe system. So only 3% were involved in designing and engineering, probably not a surprise at all. But actually, over 70% of them said that they had a role in delivering road safety education and communication. And I think this is a theme that will come out quite a bit in this year's results as well, is we still have a focus on kind of our traditional statutory duties. And if we are to deliver safe system, we need to go a little bit further beyond that. If we go to the next slide, please. One of the other things we asked in the last couple of years was about actually how do people ask for support in implementing safe systems? So where would they go and what do they need support in? So as we can see in that the spider diagram in the middle of this chart, we've got the areas of the safe system for both 22 and 23 where people really need some more support. So unsurprisingly, investment is actually very high for both years. It was something that, in order to be able to deliver this, we need to invest in this and be serious about it. But also leadership and coordination was consistently high in both years. Standards and training came out in 22, not so much in 23. But you can see there that, kind of we've got some differing places, including on legislation and regulation. Actually, there was a feeling that that wasn't what was needed in order to progress safe system. But thinking about some of the free text on the outside of this this chart, this slide, we've got, kind of documentation, coordination, leadership, and bringing in some of those other organisations who we've perhaps traditionally not necessarily worked with, thinking about vehicle manufacturers and designers. So they've got a massive part to play in this. How do we get them in the room? And at that, I'm going to give back to Dan to talk about this year and kind of culture.
Great, thanks, Tanya. So if we go to the next slide, one of my favorite quotes from famed sort of business leader, management guru, Peter Drucker, who talked about culture, eating strategy for breakfast, operational excellence for lunch, and everything else for dinner. What does that mean? It basically means that even if we think we've got the processes in place to deliver against our organizational goals, the underpinning culture that we have within our organizations or within groups of organizations will ultimately determine the outcomes. Because if we haven't created the right culture for those things to succeed, then it doesn't really matter what we layer on top of that in terms of those operational processes and activities. We're not going to move the body of people that we need to move forward, doing the right things in the right way at the right time in order to achieve the right results. So if we just go to the next slide, this is something that has been a developing understanding within just quite recent years around road safety. And we recently contributed to a paper with a range of academics and leading thinkers on safe system strategy, adoption, and delivery just earlier this year. And this is a quote that's lifted from the early part of that paper. It talks about the occurrence of death and injury in road use, reflecting the levels of knowledge, skills, experience, and will that are present within the management and operation of the road system. And that will piece is important. That's essentially the sort of the driver, the culture that underpins what we're trying to do, onto which we need to layer up those levels of knowledge, skill, and experience. And one of the things that we've been trying to explore over recent years and have done so in this survey is that the current culture, the current level of will and determination and ambition that sits within many of the organisations that are working on road safety matters. So we go to the next slide. There's an awful lot of documentation around the safe system and how it ought to be done. And the way in which we're trying to measure this ambition, this culture, this will, does draw on an extensive library of UK and international studies, papers that describe the nature of the safe system, the road safety management system, its delivery and its adoption within countries and at a subnational level. And what we tried to do was, in order to develop an understanding of how we might start to measure the culture that we've got, is to drill through this body of literature and to explore what the actions that an organisation who was really trying to deliver the safe system might expect to be doing. because when you want to measure culture, it's often easier. It can be very hard to sort of measure how people feel, or what that sort of ambition looks like. It gets expressed in how we're delivering. So by drilling through this literature, we identified well over 100 actions that you would expect somebody who was running a safe system to be engaging with. Around about 50 of those came out as strongly sort of significant actions that were repeated across the literature. And that gave us a fairly strong sense of what it means to deliver the safe system. And then what we wanted to do was to understand the degree to which that was permeating organizations. So if we go to the next slide, what we needed to do was to create a model that would enable us to understand that level of permeation, the degree to which organizations were adopting safe system behaviors, roles and responsibilities, the way it was influencing their investment decisions and the activities that they engage in. So having codified all of those actions that you would expect to see within a safe system organization, what we wanted to do was to understand ways in which we could establish a level of maturity within those organizations. So the middle of these diagrams here is Hudson and Parker's Hearts and Minds model. It's used extensively within safe health and safety maturity measurement, and basically explores how an organization can move from the pathological level, which is i.e. we don't really care what happens as long as we don't get caught, through to reacting to incidents that happen, to becoming more planned about trying to eradicate harms from within their value chain, through to being very proactive about making sure that good quality management systems are in place, to the generative, which is that actually right through the organization, layer by layer, everyone is exercising leadership and responsibility for health and safety. And we felt that that was actually a very relevant model that we could take and utilize within measuring the cultural maturity of road authorities and those working in the road safety space. So we've got this idea of what delivery of the safe system looks like. We've got this idea of what maturity of culture might look like and how we could measure it. But the other thing that we wanted to include was also some sort of way of helping organizations to then make the transition to implement and develop the tools to move forward. So we wanted a behavior change type process in the model as well. What's going to help them to move up through those layers from the pathological to the generative. And we found in Darnton and Horn's ISM model, which talks about the individual, the social and material influences on behavior, a model that seemed to well reflect what you might experience with as you're working in the road safety context. So you've got individuals who are highly motivated, they've got certain beliefs and attitudes about what underpins their actions, but those get worked out in a social context, i.e. there are roles and identity within the organization, there are networks through which those organizations have to work, and they've got institutional sort of norms and behaviors, and then that ends up being expressed within a physical, a material environment where they're running infrastructure, they're seeking to manage action on the network according to a set of rules and obligations and that sort of thing. So that creates that, bringing all of that together, we created a model that would enable us to measure cultural maturity. If we go to the next slide. And this is the model that we actually developed a couple of years ago, working with National Highways in England and also testing with some partnerships. And that's really the underpinnings of the question set that we're exploring here today around culture. So we could just go to the next slide. Because the questions that we used were then derived from this piece, where we've got questions that seek to measure the current state of maturity within organizations. And here we've slightly changed the nomenclature, the language that we use. And I'll explain why in a second. So we're moving from vulnerable through emerging to developing to maturing to advanced. The question set focuses on a range of those elements of the safe system. So whether people are doing actions right across the safe system, so things like the safe vehicles, safe roads, safe road use pieces, post-crash response. Are they embracing all of the mechanisms of change that we see within the safe system? So those are things like the leadership and coordination, standards and training, enforcement and compliance, research, monitoring, and data. And are they delivering some of the discrete actions that we would expect to see within a safe system operator? Now, we've changed the language here from vulnerable through to advanced, partly because we've also been working with some other actors internationally, the International Transport Forum, the Asian Development Bank, looking at how you rate maturity within organizations across the globe. And we wanted to try and land on some language that seemed to work well for a range of different actors within the safe system, not just here in the UK, but internationally as well. But having developed this question set, 22 questions, they allow us to probe the different components of the system, different categories of action, and the state of maturity that different organizations will find themselves in. So we go to the next slide. And here is where we sort of overlap with some of those other international bodies that are doing work on this. So as I said, the International Transport Forum has been doing some work on the sort of national state of policy and practice in terms of delivering against a safe system. They have ended up with a slightly narrower grouping of measures. The Asian Development Bank have been looking at the kind of management framework to deliver a safe system. And then sitting alongside those, the work that we've been doing is looking at the underpinning organizational culture. And we think there's some complementarity between these different ways of measuring maturity for a safe system organization. So if we go to the next slide. And now Tanya's going to start to take you through the results. What have we found from this year's survey?
Thanks, Dan. So yes, we've employed this question set for the first time out to the country. What we were asking people to do was to honestly, from their position, kind of state which of the 5 statements from vulnerable to generative that they thought their organisation was at, thinking about the different activities that they do. And for some, actually, some of the activities are not applicable, that they would never undertake them. That in itself is really interesting because if we're going to identify who should be in the room and who does have responsibility or a contribution for these different parts of the safe system, we need to be aware of it. So, as I say, we went out to the country and really, yeah, finding out whether or not people are actually embedding safe system at the nuts and bolts level within their organization, because it's become quite popular in recent years. And what we don't want it to be is kind of old approaches wrapped up with a safe system bow, or just to be a strategy on a website. And it is not actually changing how we are delivering road safety in Britain. So we did have a smaller sample size this year than for the previous 2 years. So we've had 34 different stakeholder organisations represented. We had a bit of a conversation about this earlier. I mean, is it survey fatigue? People saying, well, we did this last year and we did it the year before. Nothing's really changed from my perspective. You know, I probably don't need to take part in this again. It could be that, you know, that they didn't realise that we were looking at it from a very different angle. But also, it's a bit of a challenging topic to really drill down into the actions and the attitudes of an organisation. We've got some very passionate people at the individual level, but are they in a place to actually report on what their organisation or partners are doing as a whole? So yeah, we're not quite sure what's going on there, but what we do know is we have got a smaller sample to play with than previous years. Having said that, similar to previous years, we've got a large majority or a majority of respondents coming from the Highways Authority. So those with a statutory duty to be delivering road safety are participating in this, with 10% from road safety partnerships and 12% from other organisations. You can see for yourself the final distribution there. Let's get into some of the results and see what we found this year with the next slide, please. Thank you. So what we've got here is a diagram looking at the scores, the average scores across all of those respondents for the safe system components. So the way that we deliver the safe system. We've added road safety management as the sixth component here because actually there are some particular tasks and actions we would want to see in a fully generative, mature, advanced, safe system. So we're in the middle. We've got many of them sat in developing. And if we remember what developing looked like, it was about really starting to embrace the safe system thinking, but acknowledging that there is more work to be done to embed it fully and deliver all of those different actions that Dan identified from the international evidence. What we can see here is that some areas are stronger than others, and this does highlight some of what we found in previous years. For example, safe vehicles, the scores tend to be lower around safe vehicles. Traditionally, those who are delivering frontline road safety have had little involvement in either promoting or influencing vehicle safety. So we're not really very surprised that that is at the lower of the scoring here. What we've also got, though, is at the other end, and again, this has been reflected in previous years, is the safe road use is actually scoring the most highly. So thinking about how we influence individual behaviour, that's traditionally been higher in previous years as well. So no real surprises from me in the scoring here. But if we go on to the next slide, these are the change mechanisms. So the outside of the safe system diagram that Dan showed you is kind of the summaries of the way in which we deliver safe system. Again, these tend to be around the middle of the diagram, so in developing or maturing, but we still have got some ranges here. So leadership and coordination, legislation and regulation, and enforcement and compliance are all just at the higher end of the averages there. The lowest score, which as a research director disappoints me a little, is the research monitoring and evaluation one. So we need to do better there and kind of embed research and data and measuring what we do a little bit more. But I think what we've got here is because we've got these averages across multiple organisations, we need to do a little bit more to unpick what's actually going on. So these next few questions, actually, we're going to look at the proportions of respondents who selected vulnerable all the way through to advanced, because I think it helps us to see the kind of bigger picture. It's probably not a surprise that these averages are bang in the middle once we get onto the next few slides. So if we can go to the next one, please. And we're starting with road safety management, and these are the questions related to what we would expect in an advanced safe system in terms of management. So each of these have got 5 statements assigned to them. And we've got some real mix here because, we've got some questions where actually people are scoring quite highly. So things like, where are we? The how do we influence legislation and regulation? This one surprised me a little bit because actually the statements relate particularly to vehicle technology, but actually people were saying that they are able to influence those. So that's really positive. We've also got some more mature, the higher percentages around learning how to implement safe system approaches. So the training and kind of knowledge base is increasing around it. And also about impacting on the actions of their organisation. So this one was really about how embedded the safe system is in everything they do. So all really positive there. Some of the others are a bit more mixed. So we've got very different levels of maturity related to research, as I've just said. A third of respondents felt that research was either largely the responsibility of academic institutions or that they only engaged in it when they were prompted by others. So that's certainly something we need to think about how we can change. And one of the other ones, which was a bit mixed, was to do with determining which interventions are investing in, also calculating benefits and measuring safety performance. So these really help us to understand how we as a sector can embed safe system and kind of mature in those particular areas. If we go on to the next slide, which is about safe roads. So we only had 3 questions specifically about safe roads. And again, we've got a little bit of a mixed picture here. So as you can see here, thinking about risk factors being incorporated into the design and engineering process. Again, we tended to have a higher proportion in the maturing, so thinking about how we design. But safety being integrated into the design of road infrastructure projects, this actually kind of came about as thinking about only whenever evidence comes to light about weaknesses in road design, do we actually do anything about. So it's actually quite reactive. In fact, only one respondent said that it was usual practice to star rate their roads on their network. If we move on to safe road use, which is the next slide. So with this one, actually, we've got quite a lot of recognition about the importance of designing and managing road networks to achieve compliance. So we want people within the safe system to obey road rules and be compliant. But also we need to be able to help road users when they do make mistakes and try to support them on the network. So we've got, great stuff here about enforcement activities and compliance, and actually even helping people with new safety technology. Little bit of ambiguity about that. We've got a few, some proportions that wouldn't do anything in that space, but actually we've got others, a larger proportion who would. Education, as we said at the beginning, is really strong. The collision insights and enforcement activities are really something that came across quite strongly in the results for these ones. So that compliance element of it is there and good, which is good to know. If we go on to the next one, which is about post-collision response. This one's really quite split, and again, this isn't a particular surprise to us from previous years. Thinking about what post-collision response is has been a bit of an interesting conversation in the last few years. Is it just about emergency response? Is it just about data collection? Or is there something more that we can be doing in order to improve post-collision response and get better outcomes when things do go wrong? So there was a little bit of a split about the fact that standards and training in post-collision response is generally the responsibility of other organisations. If you're a local authority, perhaps it's thinking, well, that's down to the ambulance service and it's not really anything to do with us. Others did say that it was part of their portfolios. Interestingly, there were some respondents who were just beginning to think about how they investigate how we can have better influence of emergency care and improved post-collision responses. So yeah, there was a bit of a split as well on data collection, which again is about previous remits and how do we kind of think about what we do in terms of collecting evidence and informing our post-collision response. If we go on to safe vehicles. On the next slide, please. So again, 2 questions here. In terms of vehicle design standards, actually some stated that it was really only important when they were thinking about the adoption of standards across their own organisations. So thinking about procurement and vehicle fleets and their supply chains. As with that post-collision response, respondents felt they were really only starting to investigate how they can support better outcomes in this area. It's not something that they've traditionally worked in before. So there is a little bit of development here on how they can lobby, influence, and change the adoption of vehicle safety technologies in this space. And then if we pop onto the next one, please, which is about speeds. So actually really positively here, lots of recognition around the interaction between the physical and visual aspects of network design so that people know what appropriate speeds were. There was a little bit of ambiguity around and uncertainty about the relationships between road function, speed limits, and risk for different collisions. What we see here is that actually reviews are largely done on a site-by-site basis, rather than thinking about having an entire network which is intuitive and telling road users about the speeds we expect because of the different demands on that part of the network. But actually, many did recognise that speed and safe speeds are a shared responsibility, although some felt that actually it was the responsibility of national policy or policing authorities. So it kind of, where does that lie, did differ according to the different organisations. So that was a whistle-stop tour through the results. I'm going to stop talking now, but I think we'll pass. Well, Dan, are you going to kind of lead into George's presentation? Is that what
Yeah,
we're doing?
sure. Thank you, Tanya. So, yeah, as Tanya's just said, I mean, that helps to present a little bit of a sense of what's coming out. You hopefully can see the applicability of some of those culture questions because they start to delve a bit deeper into some of those key components of the safe system in terms of its operation. So, have we got the right leadership in place? Have we got how is the research and evidence starting to feed into the work that we do? And I'm sure we'll start to pick that up in questions because I've seen a couple of questions begin to come through along those lines. But for now, what I'm going to do is hand over to George Henry from Transport Scotland. He's going to talk a little bit about the work that they are doing and why culture is important. So, George, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dan, and pleasure to be here and nice to meet everybody. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm George Henry. I'm Head of Road Policy and Safety at Transport Scotland, Scottish Government, as I mentioned earlier. And in my role at Transport Scotland, I was responsible for seeing out the road safety framework to 2020 and then developing our new road safety framework to 2030. Could you go through the slides, please? So today I wanted to give a bit of a flavour. Many, I think, from looking at the list of attendees may not know too much about the road safety framework, so felt it would be useful kind of setting the scene, what was our thinking and how we developed our framework and what was included within it, and then leading into how we embed the safe system within Scotland and changing that culture. Next slide, please. So as kind of Dan's already alluded to, the safe system approach to road safety is deemed as international best practice. And when we developed our road safety framework, we done that alongside our road safety community and our key stakeholders. We reviewed many kind of road safety strategies right across the world and identified some of the points that we would like to concentrate on within Scotland after analysing what our key priority groups and what our problems were. We wanted a world-leading vision, something that people could relate to, aspire to, and show strong leadership in terms of how we want to move forward with road safety in Scotland. And that vision was for Scotland to have the best road safety performance in the world by 2030. And that is supported by a long-term goal of Vision Zero in 2050, where nobody is killed or seriously injured on Scotland's roads. The road safety framework itself is a strategic document, a strategic policy document where it is 5 strategic actions that are based around the components of the safe system that you can see around the outer wheel. Next slide, please. But I think it's important to kind of relay that while Scotland's had a fairly strong road safety performance over the years, I think that it was important that road safety and the profile of road safety was aligned with the government's national outcomes and indicators, and that we raised that profile. And the way that we wanted to do that was by tying in with those outcomes and indicators. And some of the big items that you can see around the outside of the climate emergency, the active and sustainable travel, our strategy, and our strategic transports projects review, which is so our national transport strategy outlines where we want to go as a nation, and road safety is clearly at the heart of that. And from a strategic transport projects review that outlines where all the big transport initiatives will be implemented over the decades, road safety plays a vital part in those. But even when you look at our health strategy, justice strategy, education strategies, our national planning framework and place principles, road safety plays a vital role in every single one of those and should be a priority within each of these areas as well. But ultimately, I think that historically, it's probably been more about what road safety could do for each of these areas. And we flipped that on its head this time by it's certainly a two-way street, and that road safety, each of these areas should be doing their bit for road safety as well. And that's something that we've tried to ensure through our partnership working within government and our partner agencies. Next slide, please. So we went to a public consultation with 10 strategic actions, and we took on board the comments that were raised through the consultation, and we added in 2 strategic actions to better draw out engineering and inequalities, and particularly align with the government's aspirations around child poverty, etc. Probably not got time today to go through every single one of those actions, but you can see that they cover all the sort of main areas around road safety and the safe system. Those strategic actions are there and are backed up by annual delivery plans. And the reason why we've done it this way is that our annual delivery plans allow us to be far more proactive than any emerging road safety themes that come forward. For example, e-bikes and e-scooters are something that's continually being discussed, whether that be from a road safety perspective or an antisocial behaviour or even a crime element. It allows these annual delivery plans allow us to be adaptive. The last road safety framework obviously achieved its targets, but it had 96 individual actions that were based over the 10-year period. So we see this as a bit more of a dynamic approach for us to be able to adapt and be proactive and reactive in certain areas as well. Next slide, please. So I touched a bit around our long-term goal for nobody to be killed or seriously injured on our roads, and there is interim targets for the number of people being killed or seriously injured on our roads to be halved by 2030, and a 60% reduction in the number of children being killed or seriously injured as well. And for the first time, we developed a full suite of mode and user-specific targets for our key priority groups, such as pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists, overrepresented age groups, areas of deprivation, etc. And that allows us and our partners to be very focused on these priority areas and what we should be delivering on. These are also backed up by intermediate measures, key performance indicators around behaviours of road user behaviours on our roads, and making sure that we are very focused through our governance groups, that we are monitoring, evaluating everything that we are doing to ensure that we're delivering against and meeting these targets. Now, naturally, when we brought this road safety framework in, we wanted to look at the people who we were engaging with. The next slide, please. And it was really important that we recognise, not just only within Scotland, but also out with, that we are engaging right across the world, because we are not the only ones doing this, are we? This is part of a global plan with a decade of action that everybody through the Stockholm Declaration and the UN have signed up to trying to make sure that road death is eradicated from our roads as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. But looking more closely at home, we wanted to look at our governance structure, who we had in place, who we were engaging with, who was coming round our table to ensuring that we are delivering in the best possible way. The last road safety framework had 2 tiers of governance, and when I joined the team, I asked what my staff members of what was being delivered at that local level. And you know, I think that it's fair to say that the response I got was one that I didn't want to accept. I think that we need to know everything that's going on in road safety, and we need to lead and coordinate and ensure that we're inspiring all our roads authorities to be the best that it can be and come along this journey with us. So we looked at that governance structure. The Strategic Partnership Board, which is the highest level of governance, remains, and we looked at the people around the table on that. So we have heads of emergency services, the COSLA, who represent our local authorities within Scotland. We have our operational partnership group, which is more at officer level and operational level, where people are from motoring groups, active travel groups, emergency services, policymakers, educators, marketeers, etc., are all around that table. But we've also revised that so affiliate members can join us to discuss pertinent issues when they come on board. And then we implemented new local partnership forums. So I'll pick the comment up, Amy, in a second. So that local partnership forums, that we can share the messages from national, regional to local level, but also very important to hear that from that we hear from the local level back up in terms of our decision making. There is a number of road safety groups that are there in place at this present moment in time at that local level as well. And it was important for us to review what was out there. And we've identified that we need key priority groups across the key priority areas to highlight in and amongst our target areas as well. But it was also important that we undertook a review of the knowledge and skills of our partners. And that was something that we've worked with Dan and Tanya and the team at Agilysis on, because whilst we've brought in the safe system and trying to embed that safe system, it was clear from the discussions that we've had with partners that ultimately they understood what the principles of the safe system, but in terms of actually implementing it and getting that organizational change was something that needed to be better, and something that we needed to kind of educate on. Next slide, please. So from that assessment that we done, we quickly realised that we needed to change the culture in Scotland around road safety. Obviously, since the pandemic, when we brought this framework in, we didn't expect the pandemic to last the length of time that it did. We didn't expect that we would go into a cost of living crisis for the time that we have, and that's really had an impact because we've seen that behaviours have changed on our roads. We have seen that there has been a kind of a rise in fatalities, and we need to kind of raise that profile of road safety to move forward. So next slide, please. So it was really important that we, whilst we understood the model, it was very important that all our partners around the table understood it as well. and how we move forward in terms of organisational change is something that was really important. So, around the safe system, we know that people are going to make mistakes, and we know that humans are vulnerable to injury, but we need to really ensure that the responsibility was shared, that our approach was proactive, and our actions were systematic. And we needed to kind of undertake a journey on how we embed that properly in Scotland and laying the foundations in the correct way. Um, we heard from our partners that they needed a kind of bit of help around that. So that was something that I felt that we needed to undertake. We reached out to various countries across the world. We looked at all these safe system manuals that kind of Dan had put up on his slide as well. And whilst the principles and the theory of safe system were all there within that, there was really nothing that kind of told you as a country of how you actually get organisations to change and how you changed that culture right from the start. Next slide, please. So that was why it was really important for us to take an assessment of how each of our partners were in terms of safe system knowledge and embedding that. And ultimately, as kind of Dan and Tanya have mentioned, we've undertaken that journey as well in Scotland in terms of ranking each of our partners in terms of being from reactive, calculative to more of the generative, and ensuring that we can move forward and be as advanced as we possibly can be. And it was decided amongst us that clearly we needed to be better, and there was stuff that we needed to do. So we embarked on some safe system training and education piece internally within Transport Scotland and Scottish Government to start with, and our wider teams. And then we looked at how we could move that forward and how can we help organisations change. Next slide, please. So we've done that through the development of our cultural maturity playbook. This playbook is a global first for any roads authority. It introduces a new approach to investing in the kind of culture to support our road safety ambitions in Scotland. The work that we've done with Agilysis on this has been really important for us. The reason we've called it a playbook rather than a strategy is it because we wanted that to reflect the dynamic nature of influence and culture. Very much a creative process that's balancing both the ambition of where we want to get to and the flexibility of how we're actually going to get there. Like anything, you have a number of bumps along the road at times, and it's important that you can be adaptive in your approach no matter what you face and what comes in front of you. It includes a set of guiding principles for all our partners and organisations, as well as a collection of tools and techniques that will help them develop the right sort of culture and become more mature in the delivery of the safe system going forward. It really aims to have that the structure to allow them to be creative and flourish as they move forward in the journey of kind of embedding the safe system in the right way. We need to make sure that through that we're not wasting any effort and resources, because we know that is a real challenge for us in Scotland at this present moment in time, in the way that some organisations have been slimming down, due to budget cuts and other kind of financial restraints that are upon them. The next slide, please. So, because obviously Dan and Tanya have touched a bit on the ISM and the cultural maturity model, I won't go into it and go over sort of old ground. But from a cultural maturity perspective, that's something that we've brought in through the playbook as well. That obviously the model delineates the kind of key stages of construction, application and operation, and it mirrors the ISM models of the individual, social and material stages to bring about that cultural shift. It's really the model underscores the multifaceted nature of behaviour, emphasising that driving change extends beyond that individual level, and that's something that we need to encompass across the broader social and material dimensions, and that's been done in Scotland through, from a construction level that showcases the individual and the beliefs, attitudes, and rules that they hold. But to bring in the change at individual level, it's essential that they're motivated to bring in the safe system culture and believe in the same things that we have through our road safety framework. And applying that, that we need to bring that cultural shift. It's more than just about the beliefs and introducing and inducing motivation. It also involves reflecting the language and the symbols that we're using through that to ensure that we are consistent in our approach in the way that we try and get those change mechanisms in place and that change can be reflected. So, for example, as leaders, if we do not value the safe system and don't symbolise that culture, then it's going to be very difficult to get change. And that change will be restricted as we move through our journey. So that's something that we've really tried to target going forward. Next slide, please. So we've developed some cultural maturity plays. We've tried to keep it simple. We've tried to keep it simple so that people can understand it and kind of relate to that. And we've done that through the ABCD of developing culture. From an advocacy perspective, it's all really about kind of building support, actively champion the our culture ambitions. We've kind of done that through alignment of our kind of aspirations and vision within the road safety framework, our common objective, our goals, and what we want to achieve. From an identity perspective, the way that we're communicating, the way that we're sharing those values, that any death and serious injury is not going to be accepted within Scotland, and that we're motivating all our partners beyond that to ensure that we're all engaged and we're all committed to ensuring that we move forward and trying to meet those targets. Across Scotland, obviously, we need to make sure that we're kind of supporting those ambitions, and we're doing that, as leaders of across our wide-ranging partners, and ensuring that compelling vision and strategy is maintained throughout. And we've got many people helping us on that journey. People who are championing, people who are challenging us, people who are innovative in their approaches and bringing forward technologies, for example, that we can use and take forward. And from an educator's perspective, and people who are implementing and evidence and using good practice right across that platforms as well. But the one thing is that we did really need to do is that we need to kind of we've identified the knowledge gaps in professional development, and that's why it's something that's really important from a training perspective that we take that forward and we take people on the journey with us to ensure that we are building the foundations correctly, that the skill set of the people implementing and the safe system in Scotland is the best that it can be, and that's something that I can touch on later in the presentation. From a behaviours perspective, we need to make sure that we are routined and we're collaborating right across all partner agencies, everybody who's dealing and implementing the safe system on our behalf, and everybody who has a part to play within that, and that we're bringing forward innovations where we can be, when we touch on design, when we touch on learnings, it's important that those are fed back into the system and that we understand and that standards are changed, processes are changed to be the best that they can be, and ensure that our systems are the safest that they can be moving forward as well. And we're doing that by looking at our performance management. The assessment that was done with all our partners will continue to be routinely updated, so that we can continue with a high performance culture within Scotland, with high expectations, and that we can show that our partner agencies are developing, so that we can be more generalised in our approach of safe system. It's important that we continue to be accountable for our actions right across the board in the way that we are kind of delivering and taking ownership of meeting our commitments. But it's very important that that evaluation takes place, not just the way that we are as organisations, but also important that every piece of work on road safety that's been done in Scotland is monitored and evaluated, so that we can make those learnings and feed them back in through the governance and wider kind of road safety groups to which we're engaging in. The C of our four plays is kind of communication, and again, it's important that we're communicating and developing that shared vocabulary, ensuring that there is clarity there and understanding. You know, I think that many meetings that I've been to over a period of time, one as recent as yesterday, of people speaking about the 4E's or accident investigation measures and prevention and everything else like that. It all plays its part, and it's all fundamentally part of the safe system. But again, it's the way that we communicate it and the way that we kind of bring safe system terminologies, and the way that we kind of put that across. It's really, really important that we can continue with that, and using that through our groups, meetings, our platforms and channels on our networks that we're using, to ensure that that is going forward. And moving forward in the right way to really kind of embed the culture through absolutely everything that we do. And then particularly then D, from a design perspective, is it everything that we do, from imagery and the symbols that we're using, the pictures, the models, that we are embedding that straight through our thinking, and that we move forward in the right way. It's something that particularly we are basically at the kind of start of that journey, I suppose. But getting the foundations right is absolutely important to us and the way that we move forward. Next slide, please. So the way that we have done that is and moving forward is vitally important through the setting a training and education platform for all our partners. We've obviously done some of the kind of training at the moment, and I'll touch on what that kind of framework looks like, and I'll touch on the Safe System Manual in the next slide as well. But particularly from a performance analysis perspective, we are looking to review our current data landscape. We will be developing a Safe System data catalogue that will then be regularly updated through our data working groups, so that we can show that we are sharing the best information and data across partner agencies, particularly where there are some gaps from an analysis perspective. Next slide, please. So our national training has been rolled out to 500 partners between now and summer of next year. It's a mix between in-person and online training. It's blended between full days and half-day sessions, depending on your role within the SAFE system. The people that are involved are all across our road safety partners, so policymakers, marketeers, educators, engineers, standards, how that relates to the design manual for roads and bridges, the people undertaking work on our trunk roads, local authorities, motoring organisations, active travel groups, emergency services, better building relationships between public health and National Health Service. But we've also offered a specially tailored training course to all MSPs within the Scottish Parliament on the SAFE system. And how do we get that fully embedded is something that we want to take forward with getting a CPD accreditation. And we are also developing the very first SAFE system manual for practitioners. So going back to many, many years ago when you done your kind of ROSPA road safety engineering, you went away with your ring binder that you could always go back to and tell you how to implement, no matter what your kind of challenges you faced. Now the SAFE system is a lot wider than that. And the one thing that we've identified is that there is nothing there for practitioners across the world at this present moment in time. So we are in conjunction with Agilysis, we are developing the first SAFE system manual for practitioners that will really inform people how to do their jobs, no matter what part of the system they relate to. And also that alongside the cultural maturity playbook, we feel that that will be the best way of really kind of changing the culture and the focus of Scotland, and it'll kind of drive us forward in meeting our government's targets to 2030. That's it for me, and kind of happy to take any questions. I know that there have been a number of questions that have been put in already, and Dan, I don't know if the proposal is to work through each of those and come up with any more.
Great stuff. Thanks, George. Yeah, so it's an opportunity now for us to start to explore some of those questions that were submitted in advance, but also some of those that have been coming through on the chat. And I'm going to give some precedence to those that came through in advance. Thank you very much for those who submitted them. But we have got a good number of questions to go to. So, Tanya, if you want to come back on camera, I was going to throw the first one in your direction, which was just a question about whether you were surprised by the results or not, and sort of what that might mean in terms of how it informs delivery moving forward.
So, I mean, I suggested a few times in the presentation that I'm not sure there were massive surprises in there. I think it did echo a lot of what we'd found from previous years, and because over half of the respondents were from local authorities, the more mature elements of the responses were for road user education and road design, and also for speed limit setting. They've always been there and have been in the other surveys. So not massively. I think the thing that did surprise me the most was under that road safety management about the adoption of safety legislation, and how there were some more mature scores there about their ability to influence. And I think that's super positive, because previously when we've been talking to local authorities, partnerships, they were at a bit of a loss of what to do in the vehicle space in particular. You know, the vehicle manufacturers are led by international guidance that has got nothing to do with us at a local level. And so the fact that they're starting to see that they can have influence in the system beyond their traditional direct responsibilities is super positive. So let's have more of that, please. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, schoolboy error. One of those things that we often talk about, isn't it, is the importance also of advocacy, George, that comes out in the culture playbook, that even if you don't have direct responsibility for a particular aspect of standards, of regulation, of legislation, etc., it's still nonetheless important for us to be building consensus and shared ambition to say these are things that actually we could be doing better if we want to deliver on the safe system. And I know certainly from Scotland's perspective that advocacy around matters which are otherwise reserved has been a key thing that you've been putting ambition around.
Yeah, ultimately, I think it's a challenge when, from a Scottish perspective, the majority of road safety is devolved. But two of those kind of items around are certainly one of the main items of the safe system around um, the vehicle element is reserved to the UK government. And then when you look at general safety regulations of vehicles not being adopted by the UK government as yet, and we certainly hope that we do so, is that there is parts that we can play with that. And I think that, when you were talking about vehicle safety, Tanya, it's something that we've been trying to work with partners around public procurement contracts, etc. I think that we've been very focused on climate, and rightly so. That when you look at the emissions of vehicles, but um, from other business discussions that we've been having, and then with our kind of partners around public procurement contracts, and when they're doing vehicle safety, has it got the highest level of safety features in those vehicles? So there is some parts that we can play, and it's kind of probably opening the vision and the minds to try and advocate in those areas, and try and influence where we possibly can to bring forward um, better safety within the vehicles that we're using in the day-to-day business.
Yeah, great, thank you. So one of the other questions that came in advance was, should there be more focus on accountability for harm caused by the design and management of roads and streets? Actually laid into a question about, should there be more of a sort of public inquiry type approach? Tanya, I was wondering whether I'd throw that one to you and then come to George, just to talk a little bit about what Scotland are already doing in that space. Yeah, more in-depth learning, I guess, is the heart of the question.
Definitely. And I think it's also an acknowledgement of that fundamental principle that responsibility is shared. So we need to move away from investigating, which obviously the police do have to do, to understand if somebody needs to be prosecuted, has a criminal act occurred. But actually, how do we understand those failures within the system? That what could have been done to prevent that particular incident from a vehicle design or a speed limit or a road design or road use perspective. And so this is where talk of fatal review boards and the road safety investigation branch are so important. We've got to think about, well, that incident could have been prevented because there was a failure in the system. How can we stop it happening again? So absolutely.
George, do you want to just come in on that? Because reviewing particularly the fatals is something that Scotland's already been doing extensively.
Yeah, so from our perspective, you know, we know that it's unacceptable for people to die and be seriously injured on our roads, and we're trying to eradicate that. But I think that the way that we learn from why these collisions occur, there's multiple contributory factors, and whilst road user behaviour is fundamentally one of the kind of biggest things, that whether it's people make mistakes or otherwise, shouldn't really, you know, it does happen, but we don't want them to be killed or seriously injured as a matter of that. And one thing that we did do is that we undertook an in-depth fatalities research of every fatal accident that occurred on Scotland's roads between 2015 and 2020. To identify what was the real causations. So when the police have done their full investigations and all that information is there, how can we learn from that data? What can we take from that? What changes can we make to our road safety management, our maintenance, or design, or otherwise? Whether that be speed management, there'll be various different, but obviously parts and components to that, and learn from that to try and make sure that we eradicate that. So there was 93 recommendations came from that report. We are working our way through each of those recommendations, because some fall to various partner agencies. And that's something that we are tackling at this present moment in time. I'm also pleased that the report is being updated to 21 to 23, and will continue to be. We have committed to working with Police Scotland and have an analyst in place that every fatal accident on Scotland roads will be forensically looked at to see how we can try and learn from that and eradicate them in the future.
Yeah, brilliant. So just picking up that learning piece, Tanya, a couple of the questions that came in, both from Adrian but also from Amy, talked about how do we ensure that research is translated for practitioners, i.e., taking from the peer-reviewed literature and making it more accessible. But also Amy asking about, sort of, is there generally a lack of confidence? Is that all a bit scary for many practitioners, and therefore that making it hard to embed? You're a research director, right?
Yeah, I am indeed. I think they are yeah, two sides of a coin that hopefully we can start to address together. So I think from my experience helping practitioners with evaluation, etc., yeah, I think it can be scary because they're very passionate about the things that they're delivering, and actually having it scrutinized, judged, and potentially told it's not as effective as they think it is obviously something that can be challenging. So we've got to kind of change perhaps the way we think about evaluations and the value that they bring in making things better, and it less be less of a confrontational kind of exercise, I think. We do also have skills and time issues though with practitioners accessing and interpreting data, and I think and evidence, and I think that comes back to kind of Adrian's question of how do we make research findings accessible so that the layman can pick them up and work with them. Obviously, an awful lot of research is written for journals. It's written in academic language. There's an awful lot of pressure in the academic world to finish a project and then start writing bids for the next one, and kind of moving on. That dissemination piece can sometimes kind of fall through the gaps a little bit. So with my road safety trust hat on, it's something I'm super, super passionate about because we've got some amazing work that's being funded. We really need to get into the hands of the practitioners. So I think we need to think about where we're putting research, in what formats, and making it easy for practitioners to use. I think we need to be writing in plain language. I think we probably need more collaboration on research projects. So we've got practitioners actually involved from the start, helping to shape research, understand the importance of it, thinking about that language at the end, because all of that will then start to bridge that gap between academia and practice. And then it will just be what people do is, well, what does the evidence say about this? What does the data say about this? How do I shape my working accordingly?
Yeah, I wonder. I'll just make a couple of comments myself, and then I'm going to throw to George in a second. I think one of the things that I've tried to labour a bit over the last few years is the need for interdisciplinary approaches. So I think we've had this sort of tendency to expect the road safety practitioner to kind of manage an end-to-end process from understanding the nature of the problem, doing a needs analysis, to resolving what the necessary interventions might be, maybe even coding the behavior change techniques that are associated with that, delivering it and evaluating it. And they're expected to do that across multiple modes and different road user groups and different segments of society and all of that sort of thing. And, if we're going to do this and do this well, it requires us to have a much more interdisciplinary approach to the way in which we tackle road safety challenges, because some of those things do require sort of advanced analytical skills. Some of them do require social research skills. Some of them do require, sort of marketing communication skills. They don't all reside within one person or often within one team. And so we've got to take a more mature approach to the interdisciplinarity of it. But also I think we do need to upskill the profession to understand how to do that and how to do that in an effective way. And I think that's where I was going to sort of move over to you, George, which is the the manual bringing together some of that evidence in digestible format is a key aspect of the ambition that you've got in Scotland.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that, the one thing when we've embarked on this journey is that we've understood that there were gaps that we could improve on. And certainly, you're never going to be able to do it alone. And many of um, the silos that have been in place in the past have been broken down. And again, I think that that's why the way the framework was written in Scotland is for everybody to kind of play their part and not just be about road safety. Delivering for road safety is something that we felt really kind of passionate about, Dan. But going forward, I think that the way that the people that we're engaging with and the way that we kind of try and get that um, sort of multidisciplined round the table to discuss issues from the get-go, and then try and identify. I think that working in government, and when you hear the terminologies such as cross-cutting policies, etc., and various things, is that I have never seen so many at this present moment in time in the way that safety are kind of as related into all of them, from our active travel aspirations, around other different modes and other different policies around pavement parking, 20 mile per hour. They're all tied in there. And I think that that's why it's important, but it is very important that the kind of that we are researching, monitoring, evaluating what's coming next as well, not just what we're doing now, and being more strategic in our thinking and the way that we're looking. And I think that the playbook as well as the manual will give us a strong kind of foundation to take that forward in the future, not just to 2030, but beyond.
Great, thanks. One other thing to mention, Tanya talked about her RST hat as a trustee of the Road Safety Trust. One of the other responsibilities I have is a trustee of Road Safe, and we are also looking to develop some more material in terms of road safety, a safe system knowledge exchange. So there'll be some additional material that will become available through that. I think there's a great deal of work across the country from many of those organisations that we talked about right at the start of this webinar, who are ambitious to try and help the sector move forward. CIHT are doing some more work in this space so that we've got the resources available to help practitioners to succeed, and not to leave that capacity gap that we started to identify a couple of years ago in terms of the survey. So another sort of quite challenging and thought-provoking question that came in advance from Adrian again, actually. In travel behaviour, he asks, away from the motor vehicle use, we've sort of had a focus that attitudes will follow the behaviour change, whereas in road safety, we often assume that we've got to shift attitudes in order to get the behaviour change. Is that a way for us to be going in terms of road safety? Tanya, I wonder whether I could sort of throw that one to you first. I've got probably some comments to add as well, but to sort of tee that one up.
I mean, absolutely. I think we've quite traditionally had a focus on road safety education. We've seen that in the results, and the idea that if we can increase knowledge and improve attitudes, then behaviour change will follow. Actually, behaviour change is much more complex than that, and that's why we've got all of those different levers available to us within the safe system. Road design changes behaviour, vehicle design changes behaviour. We can restrict through legislation on what people can be doing when they're using different vehicles, when they're out on the roads. So I think what we do need to do is think about what other levers we can use to change behaviour. And then actually we can have that what follows is a change of attitude as a bit of an acceptance. I think the 20 mile an hour in Wales is a prime example of that. We've had an awful lot of noise beforehand. It happened, behaviour has changed, things are better, and actually the noise is quietened down, so attitudes have followed because it wasn't as bad as we thought it was going to be, is it? So yeah, I think we need to think about which models and which levers, and not just rely on that chain of let's just tell people what to do. That will make things change their attitudes, and therefore behaviour will follow. It's much more complex than that.
Yeah, and I think that thing about speeds is quite interesting. Historically, one of the things that we've done is assume that the system will regulate itself. So we have selected speed limits according to the 85th percentile, for example. So we basically go, what speeds does traffic generally think is appropriate in this environment, that's probably the speed limit, rather than actually saying, what are the outcomes that we want the system to deliver in terms of healthy mobility, in terms of harms, in terms of air quality and noise pollution, those sorts of things, and then saying, right, what's the way in which we can maximize those outcomes that we are looking for? And that often probably will lead us to a position that's quite different from 85th percentile speed. It actually starts with human frailty, vulnerability, and our mobility choices. Um, the example that I quite often use in respect of this is actually the one around recycling. So, across the country, now it is absolutely the norm that you sort all of your household refuse into a range of different bins of different compositions. My father, who passed away a few years ago, when they started to introduce domestic recycling, was antagonistic towards it. It's like, why is the council making me, sort my tins into this box and my, paper into this box and that sort of thing? Um, but the regulation preceded the behaviour, and so that was the way it was going to be. For a couple of years, he used to refuse to fill his waste bins, and he used to do a run to the tip. He would still sort it once he got there, but he would make sure that he would do it on his terms. And then he got with the program. He actually realised that, you know what, I'm going to get this collected from the front of my property. It's much easier for me to just sort it at home rather than do it a run to the tip. Within no time, because it's the kind of his nature in his local community, he was known as Mr. Recycling. He'd be the guy who'd go up and down the street sort of the night before, make sure everyone's bins were out. If you got neighbours who were away on holiday, they knew that they could ask him to sort their bins out for him. Like the behaviour followed the regulatory pattern. George, I don't know whether there's anything that you'd like to add on onto this one.
I was busy answering Q and A's in
Okay.
the
Yeah.
around the manual. Um, yeah, do you know what? I think that we find that with a lot of things, Dan, is that the noise around some of these initiatives that come forward, that people just are dead against it, and when it's actually implemented, you realise that the positive impacts it can come forward. And I think it's important that obviously we communicate that probably in the initial at the start of these kind of ideas and initiatives, and we're probably going to embark on that in terms of some of the speed management items that we're bringing forward and considering in Scotland as well. So I think again, I think that the communication is very important, in the way that you feed that back from an evaluation perspective as well. And I think that particularly sharing that, whether it be at a national level, but the one thing that's important for us is the way that we do it at a local level as well. The way that we can share learnings from one area to another, and across the board. So again, I think that more, um, as we develop the playbook further, and the manual is showing Scottish specific examples around some of that as well, would be important for us. But I can see from some of the Q and A's that are coming in around the kind of when will the playbook be, when will the manual be completed, and will it be published, and the likes as well. Absolutely. And I think that whilst it's going to be based for Scotland, I think it could probably pass across as well for others.
Great stuff. Brilliant. We've, I think, managed to answer most of the questions. There are perhaps a few that we've not sort of been able to dive into in as much detail, but I'm very conscious of everyone's time. Thank you to all of you who've stayed throughout 90 minutes of conversation around the cultural maturity survey, or the capacity survey, how we've been exploring culture within that, the experience of Transport Scotland in particular, and how they're looking to embrace that culture change in order to drive their ambitions around safety. So thank you very much for joining us, and I'm going to draw a close to our time there so that we finish on time and respect your time. Enjoy the rest of your days. Do reach out to us again if you've got any questions or comments to add further. But thank you very much. Stay safe up there. Goodbye for now.